Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host. I'm your moderator today, and I'm also the creator of thechocolateLife.com. Before we get stuck into today's episode, I want to give a quick shout out to the members of the Chocolate Life who are the sponsors of the Chocolate Life Live, as well as the ChocolateLife.com. Thank you very much to everyone. And also to remind everybody, if you're watching today, go into the comments. It's the live chat on YouTube or in the comments on LinkedIn or Facebook, and let me know where in the world you are connecting from today. Now, I don't need to know whether you're connecting from YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. I will see that. But what part of the world, what country in the United States, where the United States you're connecting from, I'll get that information up on the screen as a shout out during the episode. And also, if you have questions or comments about anything that I say or something that comes up in the course of this episode, please put them in the comments as well. I'll get the question up on screen. I'll get the comment up on screen, and I will bring it up. And with that, let's get stuck directly into today's topic, which is the topic of ceremonial cacao and cacao ceremonies. And as always, if you go to thechocolateLife.com, this is the Chocolate Life homepage right now. What you'll do is you'll see that for every single one of these live streams, I put together a post. So here is the post: Ask TCL, Ask the Chocolate Life, right? Ask the Chocolate Life about ceremonial cacao and cacao ceremonies. So the idea for today's live stream comes from a Chocolate Life member, Mike King, who is with Encore Coffee in Kansas City, Missouri. After last episode, we had a quick conversation about things, and he mentioned that he was talking with colleagues about ceremonial cacao. And I do bring that up in the episode overview. So a Chocolate Life member recently asked, I was talking with a friend and the topic of ceremonial cacao came up. When I dug into what ceremonial cacao is, there are about 10 million explanations as to what ceremonial cacao actually is. Maybe a discussion for a Chocolate Life Live episode. Absolutely. So that's why I am where I am today. I'm responding to questions that members have, and happy to do that. I want to do a quick shout out to Sue Tavares. Sue from Portugal. Hey, thank you very much for connecting today. I'm glad to have you here. And if you have any opinions about ceremonial cacao or cacao ceremonies, please throw them into the live stream. Also, a quick shout out from Lynn Lockwood. I am jealous that you're in the Canary Islands, so in Gran Canaria today instead of the UK. I'm hoping that the weather is better. It's someplace I haven't been. I also believe the Canary Islands are part of Portugal, if I recall correctly. If not, let me know, and we'll get that little bit of geography taken care of. So these are, in fact, two very, very different topics. So the question of what is ceremonial cacao is one topic, right? And what are cacao ceremonies is another topic. And I do want to respond to Mike, who said he's still roasting, right? But made it for the topic. So Mike, in the background, I hope you're listening to it for the entire hour. So I have had sort of an interest in the notion of cacao ceremonies and the connection. Okay, so the Grand Canaries are a part of Spain. Lynn, thank you very much for letting me know. So I have had this interest in trying to connect sort of the religious and spiritual history of cacao through pre-Hispanic times. So from the origination of cacao, the first documented human uses and domestication of cacao, right, through pre-Hispanic times to the present day. And it came to the fore for the first time when I was in Ecuador in 2005. And I looked everywhere I could possibly see to find out if I could find any connection in the iconography of textiles, of pottery, of modern day manufactured items, which might have included cacao pods in Ecuador in 2005. And during my trip there, I wasn't able to do academic research, but everywhere I went, including the marketplace at Otavalo, I saw nothing. There was nothing that convinced me that there was a continuous thread of sort of ritual use of cacao in a spiritual sense, which could be traced back all the way through to the first use and domestication of cacao, which we now know was about 3500 BCE in the Zamora-Chinchipe, which is a province in modern-day Ecuador near the Peruvian border, which is where the first archaeological remains of the human use and domestication of cacao were. So I've had this idea, is like, what is the connection? And if there isn't a connection, why not? I mean, why? So there's no obvious archaeological evidence that we found so far that says that there was widespread spiritual connection in South America where cacao originated. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't any. It could mean that we just haven't found it yet, and our understanding of it may be incomplete. One of the theories that I have is that there was a connection to ayahuasca, and there is a female goddess, Mama Ayahuasca, as people have explained it to me. And it may be that because of how potent that connection was, ayahuasca is a very powerful hallucinogen. It's changes brain chemistry much, much more than cacao does, is that it may be that there just wasn't any room. There just wasn't any room to think about cacao spiritually. And what we do is we have to wait until we get to so pre-Maya, so Olmec and Toltec in Mesoamerica. So cacao is making its way up slowly from Ecuador to Mesoamerica, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, Chiapas, states in the Yucatan, and Mexico. And we have to wait until it gets there, until for some reason there becomes a connection between cacao and creation mythology. And again, we have evidence that this connection exists, but we don't actually know what the origin of that connection is. How was it that the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica brought cacao into their spiritual practices? How did it become a part of their creation mythology? I don't think that that's well understood at all. Right? And for me, as I look at the question of cacao ceremonies, what I'm looking for is this connection back to early Maya and pre-Maya thoughts about cacao and its connection to the pantheon. Now, I had this interesting conversation with somebody a couple of days ago, and it occurs to me that we have this word for cacao. We call it theobroma, food of the gods. And so that's Latin. It's part of a binomial naming system, Theobroma cacao, tea cacao, which was created by a Dutchman by the name of Linnaeus, and Carolus Linnaeus, if I'm correct. Don't count me on that. But one of the things that it occurred to me that would be really, really interesting is that sort of in this context could that be an accident of history, right? The fact that it was Latin. Right? Because in what is now Mexico, which is when Hernan Cortez and the other conquerors of this region landed, they landed in Mexico. And there was a religious connection through the dominant Aztec tribes that they interacted with at that point. Right? But so because there was this religious connection at that time, right? It was very highly valued. Its use was limited to a priestly class, perhaps warrior class, as well as members of some aspects of the business class involved in trading. Right? That when cacao went back to Europe, it made sense to use a Latin term, theo, broma, food, gods. The other way around, broma would be food, theo would be gods. But theobroma, it made sense. Now, what had happened if instead of it was Hernan Cortez, it was some Portuguese explorer, and they landed in Brazil, in coastal Brazil, when there was in fact no recorded connection, right, between cacao and creation myths? Or if they had landed, on the other side of the continent in Guayaquil, what is now Guayaquil, when there's no connection to the gods at that point. would we think of it as the food of the gods? Right? Interesting question. If anybody's got any insight into any of those things, I would really, really be interested in knowing about that. I've been doing research off and on for more than a decade in these topics, and I have yet to find any connection that I've found. So interesting question. Is the fact that we use Latin, this Latin term theobroma, an accident of history having to do with the fact that the Spanish arrived in Mexico as opposed to the Portuguese arriving in Brazil? Want to go there. So there's a lot of comments in the stream. I want to get to them before I continue. So we've got Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce Chocolates in Kittredge, Colorado, who says, great question, Mike. Ceremonial cacao has always been a mystery. Now, I just want to let you know, Mark, and everyone who's listening, that I don't necessarily know that I'm going to solve the mystery. I'm going to, I think, hopefully reach some conclusions. Maybe it'll provide some clarity. But I also want to make very, very sure that what I'm not doing is I'm not discounting anybody's belief system here. So, for example, many people believe that the I Ching can be used to predict the future. I don't believe that, right? But what I do think that the I Ching can be useful for is as a tool for concentrating intention on in a particular kind of way according to a particular sequence. So if you throw the sticks in I Ching and you get the various different results of the patterns that are involved, they're tied with a particular word and a particular way of thinking about that word. And now what you're doing is you're looking at whatever situation you're in from the context of that word. And then you look at the change, and it provides this path for you to look at things from a different perspective than you normally would. And again, while I don't believe in the power of the I Ching to predict the future, I'm not into astrology and horoscopes. I don't believe that there's a connection that can be made there. But I understand how they can be useful to some people in terms of thinking about the world. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to cacao ceremonies. And this will become much more clear over the course of the rest of the episode, that for many people, cacao ceremonies are not necessarily a connection to a creation myth, right? What it is, it's a combination of a number of what we would think of as New Age spiritual practices, yoga, meditation, and things like that. And what it becomes is a way to perhaps relax yourself, to think about the world, to meditate, all of which have effects on brain state and body chemistry, and then to consume this beverage, cacao, which also has chemicals which may contribute to that change in brain state and change in the way we're thinking of the world. Now, if it works for you, it works for you, right? And I understand the value of being quiet and meditating and consuming a piece of very high quality chocolate and being in the moment and paying attention to the changes in my body and the changes in my thinking. And so if that's what you're doing, and that's why you're engaging in cacao ceremonies, that's fine. But I want to be very careful to say that in that way of thinking about cacao ceremonies, there is no connection to the Maya creation myth that involved cacao. There's nothing there. And there is some evidence to suggest that that's not even how the Maya in the early Maya period and the late classic Maya, there's no evidence to suggest that that's in fact the way Mayan people actually used cacao ceremonies. I want to be very, very clear that, if this is something that you value, that works for you, go ahead and do it. Just be aware of the fact that what you may be involved with is something which is rooted in relatively modern New Age yoga, crystals, pyramids, those kinds of things, ways of thinking about spirituality and healing. Right? You want to be very clear about that. So Brigitte Racine, a colleague I've known for a long time, and Brigitte and I are working on a project which we're going to announce sometime in the next couple of weeks, which I'm really really excited about. But she says Linnaeus found the word cacao quite barbaric, and therefore put it in second place after Theobroma. That may be true. I don't know exactly how that decision. The binomial naming system is one that was in place. We've seen, cacao being reclassified out of the Stersulice branch into the Malvaceae branch. It's fairly fluid. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the word Theobroma and where it came from, not the fact that it's from these roots Theo and Broma, which are Latin, right? And that not necessarily whether cacao came first and Theobroma came first. And there are lots of other kinds of cacao. We have grandiflorum. There are lots of other cacaos. So there's something like 20 some odd species that exist under this higher level classification. I wanted to go there. Brigitte also commented she's heard that ayahuasca and other herbs essentially precluded cacao from taking a spiritual seat in those early cultures. No, absolutely. And that's my hypothesis. I have yet to see any specific research, credible academic research, that points me in that direction. But that is what I think might have happened, or at least it's a plausible hypothesis. Let's put it that way. And I've yet to hear other hypotheses that sort of crowd this out. And I've been working with some researchers. I had a chance when I was in Ecuador last year to be able to speak with Francisco Valdez, who led the research into discovering the archaeological research in Zamora Chinchipe that led to the modern understanding of the origin of the use and domestication of cacao. And I had, at least posed this hypothesis to him, and he thinks it's also very, very credible. So, but yeah, I think that there is a connection there between the Latin term, how the Latin term is constructed, and also how ayahuasca, as a very potent hallucinogen used by shamans to make this connection, it's much more powerful, right? And also, what you do is in South America, what you do is you find there's lots of stimulants. So we have mate tea. We also have guarana. So we have sources of stimulants in the environment that are much more common and much easier to process than perhaps cacao is. And so that might be one of the reasons why cacao was not used in these ritual ways. But what we may find is that cacao was a product that was used as one of a number of foods, right, in ritual ceremonies. And as a matter of fact, there's evidence to suggest that in Maya times, that in fact cacao was in fact consumed as one of a number of foods in rituals at that point. And we need to be very clear that there's a very huge difference, that there is a big difference between Maya peoples and Aztec peoples thought about cacao and its place in the pantheon. So yeah, Brigitte, thank you very, very much for that. Getting to Natalia Padilla Pino, I hope that's Pino and not Pino, but from Ecuador, we have been very exposed to these Andean spiritual practices. Cacao always has played a very important role in spiritual growth, right? So Natalia, what I want to know, and perhaps this is you can share with me, when we talk about these Andean spiritual practices, are these ones which we would think of might have stemmed from sort of the Incan domination of that part of Latin America? Would we, what we now call Latin America, so the Incan domination of that part of the world, would they have been things that were part of Quechua mythology? And where can we go and find, really, really strong ethnographic research, which can point me to a pre-Hispanic, right? A pre-Hispanic spiritual practice. That I would like to know. And I am fully open to it. I've been looking for it and yet haven't been able to find it. Natalia also goes on to say, the Mayan mythology explains why cacao is named as the food of the gods. Again, I happen to think that it's completely coincidental that we had a word in Nahuatl, which is cacao, right? And that when the Spanish arrived, they saw cacao, they saw the way the product was reserved. That's where cacao comes from, cacao. And then we would have gotten that Latin term. But again, if instead it was the Spanish arriving in Mexico, it was the Portuguese arriving in Brazil, would it have been named the food of the gods if there wasn't already this connection, the spiritual connection? I don't think so. But if anybody has any more ideas about that, I would be really, really interested in now. So yes, again, Brigitte, Natalia is talking to, Brigitte is talking to Natalia. Cacao and corn were sacred foods brought to humanity by the gods. They are in the Popol Vuh, absolutely, right? But did that idea originate in pre-Maya, so Olmec and Toltec, which would have been the cultures that were responsible for breeding Criollo cacaos? It would be that where it came from. Now, right, so really, really important questions. I had the great good fortune early on in my career, so this is in the 1996, as a matter of fact, to be able to meet Michael Coe. So Michael and his wife Sophie were responsible for publishing the book, The True History of Chocolate. It turns out that my ex-wife's parents were at Yale University and were friends with Michael. And I had a chance to discuss with Michael some of these ideas a long time ago. And as far as he was concerned, again, this is, when did Michael die? He died in 2016 or something like that. I think that, even through the amount of time that we had a chance to talk about this, these were open research questions as to when this came about. Absolutely, Mayan, again, Natalia, thank you very much. Mayan cacao symbol was the dark side. They use it for sacrifice resembling bloods. I actually don't know how much that was Mayan as it was Aztec. Certainly it was used in terms of blood sacrificed, and they would have colored the chocolate beverages that they were drinking with achiote to make it resemble blood. I know about that from what I've read about Aztec use of it, but I don't necessarily know where the overlap is with actually Mayan practices. From what I understand, it's not a part of early Mayan practices. So really, really interesting, kinds of discussion, exactly what it is that I wanted to think about today. Again, cacao has always used together with other substances to increase effects. Again, Natalia, if you actually can point to academic research that talks about this, I would love to know what that academic research is, what the archaeology is, or if there is any research which has been done by ethnographers, ethnobotanists, ethnobiologists who have done this, so that what I can do is I can put that information in as links into the post for today's live stream. I would love to be able to do it. Certainly, I know that there's anecdotal evidence to talk about this, but I don't know how much of that anecdotal evidence actually predates the arrival of the Spanish, right? And the way they've documented things. I would really love to have more concrete evidence. So, one of the things I had the opportunity when I was back in Ecuador in 2005, I was first there in 2003, to go take part in an ayahuasca ceremony. And I did it in the home of a professor who was a self-professed shaman. It took place in a residence in a suburb of Quito. Actually, it took place in the basement garage of this house in a suburb of Quito. And one of the things the shaman told us is that that cacao was routinely mixed with ayahuasca. And in the research that I've done since then, that probably is not true. That there is no traceable connection that I've been able to find, again, between cacao and ayahuasca as being complementary to increase its effects. I think it was there to tell a story about cacao and also to make it taste less bad. Anybody who's consumed ayahuasca knows that it is in fact a very, very bitter alkaloid poison, and part of this ritual ceremony of taking ayahuasca is to vomit it up, and it can be unpleasant, part of the experience. But I would really, again, I would be really interested to know. I've been looking for the research. If you have the links, please, please share them with me. Now, you can go to share them here, either on LinkedIn or YouTube or on Facebook. Or what I'm going to say is, if you become a member of the Chocolate Life, what you can do, and there's a free membership. So I'm not suggesting that everybody have to pay, but there's a member discussion down here in the bottom. And if you have links to research, please put them down here in the research. And what I will do is I will go do my own vetting and following up on that and put it up into the body of the document and incorporate it. So I'm really, really happy to be able to go into that. And I just want to let you know that I did a lot of research in finding sources for what it is that we want to talk about today. I did do that. Natalia, again, yes, Incas in the past and now are indigenous people in the festivities of solstices and equinoxes. Again, right, I would like to see the actual research on this. Again, I've been looking for it, but if you can find it, and thank you very much for taking a look. You've only seen it empirically. Yes, if you're in contact with people who might have some scientific studies or evidence, we'll get back to you. Thank you very much. That's exactly what it is that I am looking for out of this conversation. And Brigitte, one always have to be careful with self-processed shamans. When I was researching my book about the Mayan calendar, I came across a great deal of misinformation. I think that is a fabulous segue. Brigitte, you didn't know it, but thank you very much for that. And I want to talk about this guy, right? Keith Wilson, right? And he is a self-professed chocolate shaman. So Keith, who is obviously not of a Latin heritage, he says, this page here says he was originally a geologist and adventurer. He fell in love with the world of healing and meditation in the 80s and 90s, New Age spiritualism. After developing his intuitive capabilities and helping himself and others work through their personal blocks, he traveled to Guatemala in 2003 and met the Cacao Spirit. So he met the Cacao Spirit in Guatemala, right? I'm not going to say he did or he didn't. I am skeptical. My first instinct is to be skeptical until there is evidence which is presented to me, which is convincing to me. But when it comes to things which are, so I would call myself a methodological naturalist in that respect. So we can't know about the supernatural realm. It can't be examined by science. So what I want is good evidence, which is going to convince me. But nonetheless, Keith went down to Guatemala after spending probably 2 decades or so in examining certain aspects of New Age spiritualism, what I am calling New Age spiritualism. I don't know how Mr. Wilson would describe it. And he met the Cacao Spirit. Now, this Cacao Spirit is gendered, she, right? And again, if somebody knows about, again, the Guatemalan Mayan tradition, whether or not that god was a she, I don't know that it was, but there's certainly a lot of female gods in the pantheon. So I would be interested in knowing about that. Anyway, she led him discover the ancient Central and South American society's use of pure ceremonial grade cacao to open the heart, clear the mind, and empower those working towards creative goals. Right. So, okay. So Keith found the Cacao Spirit directed towards ceremonial grade cacao. I wonder if the spirit called it ceremonial grade cacao, or whether this is a retcon or a retrojection of his feelings after the fact about what it was that he found. But what I want to do now is go from this Keith Wilson a little. And so this is on Keith's website. And I want to talk about this article, right? And this article is from a writer by the name of Aisling Walsh. And Lynn, I hope I pronounced this properly. I believe it's an Irish name. And Lynn is somebody who's been a friend of the Chocolate Life for quite some time. When she heard that I was doing this topic, she sent me the link to this article, right? And I want to say that I couldn't have done a better job in terms of writing about cacao ceremonies and ceremonial cacao than Aisling does in this article. Now, this is not yet in the post for the Chocolate Life. I will add it in after today's episode. But if you're looking for what I think of as it's certainly a skeptical look. So Aisling is purely not a believer in cacao ceremonies. I mean, it's a more objective repertorial approach to it. And so maybe it's a bit of confirmation bias on my part that I really like what it is that Aisling is writing about. But she goes, and this is where I first heard about Keith Wilson. And apparently, Keith Wilson is somebody that, is famous around the world. And one of the reasons why I mention that is that there is, let me see if I can get this a little bigger. One thing that is really interesting about that is that Keith is self-described. So I want to talk, inviting the cacao spirit into play, right? So Wilson has been in Guatemala since 2003. We heard about that from his website in his bio, during which time he's developed a reputation as the world's premier cacao specialist. I'd never heard of this guy before, and I've been working in cocoa and chocolate for more than 20 some odd years. And it turns out that he is maybe the world's premier ceremonial cacao specialist or cacao ceremony specialist, right? But he is certainly not the world's premier cacao specialist. Now, earlier this morning, like 6 a.m. at Arizona time, I was on a Zoom call with the organizers of the new Cacao Quality Assessment Guide, which is coming out of the Cacao of Excellence program. Many of the people who are involved in that project, Ed Seguin, Darren Suka, Brigitte Lelibite, the Carolina Aguilar, who's the head of the MOCA project, Maximizing Opportunities for Coffee and Chocolate in the Americas. I mean, the people who are involved in that project are world-renowned specialists in cocoa. Keith Wilson, I have trouble believing that Mr. Wilson is in fact the world's premier cacao specialist. And as a matter of fact, if you go search for Keith Wilson in DuckDuckGo, I mean, I use it because it's a more privacy-focused search engine, that the people who think Keith Wilson is an expert are either Keith Wilson or people who are what I would call are followers of Keith Wilson. I went through, the first 100 or so results in the search, and I can't find anybody who I would think of as an expert in cocoa coming out of the world of cocoa and chocolate who thinks of this guy as an expert. I'm just picking apart this particular representation because I think it's really important to understand who this person is, what they're doing, and what's going on, right? When it comes to ceremonial cacao and cacao ceremonies. Now, having said that, what I want to do is I want to go make a little side trip. And the first one is, this is a post. This is on the website Cours de Chocolat, David Greenwood Haig. Many people who were involved in the Chocolate Life on Clubhouse will know that David was my co-host for the Chocolate Life on Clubhouse for many, many months. And one of the things that he does, right, is he puts a date down here. So cacao's earliest encounter with spirituality said the earliest documented use of cacao dates back to around 1900 BC in southern Mexico. All right, so no, this is now 3500 BC in Ecuador. So David is normally an extremely credible and reputable source, right? Many people would point to this and go, oh, but as a matter of fact, this has been superseded by more recent research. So we always need to be careful about understanding what our sources are, right? And vetting them against other information. So really, I just pointing this out as, in the research, I went to see what, when this showed up in search results, I went to see what David had to say about this, right? So we also have this really interesting article about the history of chocolate, which is coming out of Smithsonian Magazine. Again, we're just providing context and background here to a much bigger story. And we've got this really interesting website that's put together. It's cacao and chocolate. And I don't know why the page is not loading completely. Let's see if we can reload it. Oh, this is a shame because there's a lot of information here. This is probably one of the more complete, generally accessible explanations around cacao in ancient Maya religion, what the relationship was in Mayan society related to chocolate. So, for example, it was available to commoners, not just to members of the priestly and warrior and other classes. I mean, it's really, really fascinating. I can't recommend this series of articles on this website around history because I found them incredibly, incredibly important. I also wanted to now, if I can, go make the bridge between sort of cacao ceremonies and ceremonial cacao. And this is one of the longer articles that I found. And it turns out this gentleman, Eduardo Antonio Morales, does live down in Guatemala, and he does give cacao ceremonies. Right? And he's talking about what is ceremonial cacao and what makes it ceremonial. And he addresses these questions directly. Now, one of the things which is I found really, really quite wonderful about this is that he recognizes that there are two main families of cacao beans. We have the Criollo family and the Forastero family. So these two large families, right? And I don't recall directly, but we know from recent research by Professor Valdez on the work down in Zamora Chinchipe that the forasteros, which are indigenous to Latin America or South America, came before the Criollos. So that it appears that the Olmecs and the Toltecs would have selectively bred Criollos from the forasteros, and they might have done it to make them less bitter, right? Because so that it require less fermentation, so that would require less labor in order to be able to make them more edible, and it might have been done to increase the level of chemicals which had psychoactive and other effects on body chemistry. That we believe that, but there are not a whole lot of sites in the world so in terms of general consumer sites, which recognize that Criollo and Forastero are the two main groups, right? Now, what they do talk about, however, is that he talks about if you want to do ceremonial cacao, what you want to do is you preferentially want to use Criollos Trinitarios. Okay, some people call this heirloom as opposed to Criollo Trinitario, and then they call forasteros are suboptimal. And so, okay, so we have some preferred genetics to ceremonial cacao. Okay, so we want to use Criollos and Trinitarios. We might also look at what are called the neo-Criollos, the Acriollados, as they're sometimes called in Nicaragua. So we would have seen Criollos in Nicaragua that would have been transported to Trinidad. They would have been hybridized in Trinidad. Those hybrids would have come back to Nicaragua and interbred with the existing Criollos. And those are what we call neo-Criollos or Acriollados in Ecuador. So a very, very complex, fascinating history. But we're looking at Criollos and Trinitarios as being the preferred varieties, right? Now, okay, and the reason why we want them, according to this particular article, again, it says that the Criollo is a wild strain. There are some wild Criollos, wild harvested Criollos, not a whole lot. And so most of the Criollos that are available commercially on the market today are in fact farmed. So just quickly know about that. The Criollos are a wild strain. They are less hardy and milder. That's usually true. Criollos, so they also have a higher concentration of health restoring and consciousness altering compounds. And so they do mention some of the compounds that increase change brain and body chemistry, theobromine, serotonin, proanthocyanins, anandamide, which connects with the same receptors that THD connect within the brain. Menthol xanthines are just a fancy name for caffeine and theobromine, tryptophan, phenylethylamine, PEA, as it's sometimes referred to, and many other chemicals that, when consumed, generate a particularly potent heartwarming sensation in the body. Okay, now I'm going to suggest, and this is actually part of my one of my theories about how things came to be. Again, it's a hypothesis. It seems plausible. There's no research to suggest. And that is that if we go back 2,000 years, 3,000 years, 4,000 years, right, the level of environmental contaminants that we are exposed to on a daily basis, probably less than it is in modern times. Certainly we don't have internal combustion engine artifacts that we're dealing with. And also, there's not a whole lot of sugar in the diet, right? And so the amount of chemicals that would have been required to change state of being, mind, like open up consciousness, as we're talking about, or that would have caused an internal, some sort of internal feeling, would have needed to be a lot lower than they are today. And so I think that part of ceremonial cacao and part of cacao ceremonies are about trying to find a place where we can connect with our inner selves in a way that is difficult to in our regular day-to-day society. All right, so just that's part of it. And I think that there's value in that. I mean, if you find value in it, whatever form of meditation you want to engage in, and if you find that meditation in conjunction with the consumption of a product like cacao is a good thing, go ahead and do it. It works for you. And I have to admit that there are times, as I may have mentioned, when I consume mainly chocolate, not necessarily a beverage, where it's part of a meditative, but more relaxing meditative ritual. When I'm feeling particularly stressed, I don't consume chocolate, drinking chocolate beverage on a regular basis for the purposes of doing that. I've never found it to be a useful part of my life, but I understand what it is. So the Criollo strains, so Criollo strain also has a wide range of bean and potency variations that change depending on the location and the process through which it is grown. Right, so the location where it's grown. So we all know that terroir has an effect on things, and the process that is grown, we may be talking about post-harvest processing. So we're talking about how is it fermented and how is it dried. All of those things have an effect. And then we're talking about also, so ceremonial cacao is pure cacao bean paste. So we're talking ceremonial cacao is chocolate liquor. Bang, right? Ceremonial cacao or ceremonial cacao, as it is also known, is a very specific type of product. It's 100% of pure cacao bean paste that contains a much higher quantity. So it turns out that almost all chocolate made in the world today goes through the liquor stage before it turns. So it's almost all pure cacao bean paste before it gets converted into chocolate. So it's not a unique product. What is unique product is what takes cocoa mass or chocolate liquor and turns it ceremonial. One of the things that turns it ceremonial, it is made from high quality Criollo cacao beans. That's sort of minimized down here in this image. Well, no, Trinitarios are also acceptable, perhaps because they have some Criollo parentage in them. But you can make ceremonial cacao from beans that are different from pure Criollo cacao beans. So, all right. So we've got its liquor. It's made from particular varieties of cacao, and it is minimally processed. So here's another things. So ceremonial grade Criollo cacao paste, right, is made in a very specific way in comparison to the more widely available and widely known cacao-based products such as cacao powder and dark chocolate. All right, pure ceremonial cacao is minimally processed through traditional production means that originated in Mayan and pre-Maya Olmec civilization. All right, which is where this author says that the tradition of using cacao in a ceremonial way started. The paste is made by fermenting the beans, slightly heating the highest quality ones on the hot plate. So this is somebody who's in Guatemala, is around cocoa, doesn't understand the process completely. We have to ferment the beans. And do we want to ferment the beans? Because fermentation changed chemistry. Is that change in chemistry? Is it affecting the bioavailability of the compounds? Or is fermenting, is it negatively affecting or positively affecting the bioavailability of the amount and form and the bioavailability of these compounds? That's an open area of research. We don't know. But we don't take the beans, ferment them, and then heating them. That's not the way it works. It also says that ceremonial grade cacao must be hand peeled, right? Which is going to make it extremely expensive. I don't know what hand peeling does that adds anything other than cost to what's going on. It says that it heated on a hot plate. Traditionally, this would have been done on a comal. And for anybody who's been to Tabasco, Mexico, they may know of a town called Comalcalco. And Comalcalco is thought to be the home of the comal as a cooking method, just a bit. And I've seen comals throughout Latin America. They're all over the place. But it represents a particular way to do it. Now, if I'm going very, very traditional, some people would say I would need to put this comal on a tripod of rocks above a fire. This comal, for roasting, each one of the rocks in the tripod has a connection to a certain spiritual aspect. I'm not going to put this above a wood fire in a chimney and then put a frying pan on top of it. That's not traditional. Just so, again, we need to think through some of the inclinations. So you have to hand peel them and then grind them on a heated mill, traditionally a stone mill. And so people would know that, we're likely to have a metate. That metate would also have a fire underneath it to warm the stone of the metate to make it easier for the fat in the beans, in the nibs to melt. And then I would work on mano on this. So yeah, so we have a minimally processed. We don't want to over roast it, and we don't want to over refine it. So because of the process, the Criollo bean retains most of its beneficial properties and its fat content is activated. The fat content is activated. The fat is melted. I don't know. All right, so half of the cacao bean is fat, and grinding the bean up breaks up the cells and liberates the fat. Maybe that's what they mean. It's activated, which is healthy for humans and is the best natural carrier for the cacao beans compounds throughout the body. Well, I'm not entirely sure with that because we consume the cacao and it is processed in the stomach and in the intestine. And so how much of that fat actually makes it through the intestines and the liver into the rest of the body. So fat is not a carrier of whatever the chemical compounds are into the body. So there's a misunderstanding there. None of this is present at nearly the same levels in other cacao-based products because the extremely high temperatures they are roasted, as well as the complex production processes. So we have an idea about processing. So it is a particular variety of cacao. It is not adulterated with anything, and it is minimally processed. None or minimal amounts of sugar are added. I would say that if you're a ceremonial cacao purist, nothing is added. You're not going to add sugar to it in order for it to be ceremonial. And by the way, in the process of researching this, I saw some people who present themselves as leaders of cacao ceremonies, making cacao beverages based on plant-based milks. And I would say, again, for a purist, you're not using milk. You're mixing this with water, right? The point here is that you're not adding anything like honey and spices like cayenne pepper. So it says natural sweeteners like honey and spices like cayenne pepper are staples in ceremonial cacao preparation. So it's important to understand that cacao is quite bitter when it is roasted. And it's really quite interesting that in Mexico to this day, and actually throughout Latin America, you have a cacao lavado, which is an unfermented washed product, which means there is literally almost no fermentation involved. And what happens is when you roast it, they tend to do a very, very high roast. So traditionally, I don't necessarily know that roast levels were considered to be a part. So low roast levels are considered to be part of it. Keep in mind that while pre-Enlightenment, so scientific enlightenment, peoples were very, very good observers of nature. They didn't have any tools for analytical chemistry. And so they might have been able to understand that roasting beans one way might have produced more effect than another. They wouldn't know why this happened. They would only know that it happened. And so I think that retrojecting or retconning any understanding from a modern day sense is anachronistic and it makes no sense. Right? I just want to go through. So what do we have when it says with ceremonial cacao? This is actually a place which is interesting because not every one of the places that talk about ceremonial cacao say it is organic, right? And so I would say it needs to be grown according to organic principles. So no synthetic fertilizers, no synthetic pesticides. Does it need to be certified organic? Probably not. But there you go. So the 5 essential elements that make cacao paste ceremonial grade. And I would have to say that's probably a fairly accurate assessment of what makes ceremonial cacao ceremonial cacao. It's pure cocoa, right, with no ingredients added to it. It's grown in organically, even if it's not organically certified. It is made from high quality cocoa beans, right? Now, there are some preferred genetics. Not everybody agrees. So as I say, some people say it just needs to be heirloom, whatever heirloom means. Many heirloom beans are, they determine heirloom by does it make good quality chocolate, not are the, so we want to preserve the beans for their genetic potential to produce chocolate, not necessarily for their genetic potential to produce liquor. These are very different things. So we need to understand that. But it's a really good definition for what ceremonial cacao is. Now, I did not think it was going to take nearly the hour to get through to this point of things. I was going to do a little bit more. I was going to spend a little bit more time on other areas. So there's some really, really interesting other bits of research here that I want to point you at, because I think that, again, completely fascinating. You don't have to pay attention right now to what's going on here. All of these links are in the post for today, and you can go back and you can look at them and you can watch them and you can make up your own mind. But what I want you to suggest that before you look at any of the other resources here, that before you go look at any of the videos, what you do is you start off reading this article on the power of cacao, right? To put modern day cacao ceremonies in a context. Now, part of what they're talking about here is it cultural misappropriation? Yes or no, depends upon what you mean by cultural misappropriations. Under some definitions, yes. Under some definitions, no. It has to do with intent. By the way, some people think that what makes ceremonial cacao is that it is made intentionally, right? So it is intended to be made as ceremonial cacao, and that somehow doing that makes it. There are lots of things going on there. But again, Mike's original question right back here is, what are the definitions of ceremonial cacao? What makes ceremonial cacao ceremonial and cacao ceremonies? And so I would say start out here, right? Then I have organized all of these resources, and I think is a narrative order. So read one and then the next and then the next and then the next in order to be able to uncover the narrative that I have found works for me and that made sense in terms of examining the topic. And what I want to close with, first of all, I want to just a couple of things before we go. So we've got Brigitte, can't tell you how much damage Jose Arguelles did to the Mayan Mesoamerican calendar and its legacy. Yeah, totally. Again, this is anachronistic. We're reading modern interpretations into what's going on in other cultures, and we're imprinting our ideas, perhaps from other religions and things like that, onto things. It's hard to tease these things out. The microbiomes are certainly quite different than they were in older times. Again, this is talking about, if there is less environmental pollution and there's not as much consumption of, for example, sugar and refined carbohydrates, are our bodies going to be more sensitive to the chemical composition? I think this is what Brigitte is referring to. There's also a big difference between people in rural areas in the global south versus people in the city's global north. And this is dietary and just civilization in general. But what I want to do is I want to suggest that what we do is we move the conversation between South and North and global South and global North into something like producing countries and consuming countries, right? Because there is in fact an built-in bias into the language of North being up and North being better. And if you're South, you are not as good. And so when we use terms like global North and global South, we're actually making value judgments, which we may not know that we're making. So as part of the language, I want to get people to think about rethinking the way they use those terms. So Natalia, thank you very much for all your input this hour. It's been greatly appreciated. For us, Ceremonial Cacao has to comply with some requirements, right? So it has to be Cacao Arriba, which is really interesting because Arriba is a forastero. I mean, it is a cross, right? But it is primarily a forastero. It is many aspects of Arriba are considered to be heirloom, but not all are. So Arriba, we need to be careful about that. But this is specifically an Ecuadorian view on it. So it has to be Arriba. It has to come from the forest. It has to be wild, right? And so this may be an Ecuadorian understanding. It is certainly not an understanding that I get from listening to other people. There's not a whole lot of wild harvested cacao out there in the world. Ours comes from ancestral trees. If you can find it, they have a specific way to get care from the people in charge. The way of processing needs to be very careful with specific considerations. Finally, we have our liquor to receive the subtle sunlight and moonlight, and we made a ritual that resembles the blessings for the people. That may be true, but what you've just done is you've taken cacao ceremonies, which is the way you consume the ceremonial cacao, out of the Mayan context, and you've created a different ritual. And so I think we have to understand, if we're doing cacao ceremonies, what the connection to which heritage are we talking about. Again, I'm not saying good, bad, right, wrong, one way or the other. I'm just understanding is that this is part of where the confusion around what is and what isn't ceremonial cacao is. And it's also really important to understand that, right, in most parts of the world, this is what a chocolate shaman, this is what a cacao shaman looks like, right? It's middle-aged white male, right? Or it might be a younger white female, right? And what they've done is they have taken an integration of New Age spiritualities and created a mishmash, right? And presented them. I'm not making a value judgment on them, only recognizing that there may be a loss to a connection to an original reason why these ceremonies came into existence in the first place. And I was having a conversation yesterday with His Majesty the Oloni of Eti-Oni in Nigeria, Obadokun Thompson, and I was talking about cacao ceremonies, and I asked him how cacao was used ceremonially in Nigeria. And one of the reasons why I did that is that his great-grandfather was among the first people to plant cacao commercially in Nigeria in the late 1890s. And one of the things that I learned from him is that in modern days, cacao is used as one of a wide range of food products in naming ceremonies. So there is no uplift gift to the gods meditation associated with it. It becomes, at 8 days, you put a little bit of honey on the baby's lips and, may your life be sweet. And they'll put a little bit of chocolate or cacao on the baby's lips and make a similar kind of blessing. And this, did a whole digression about, that sounds like a bris ceremony. Did it come from, Jewish traditions? Would it have come from another? Or were, in fact, all these traditions having to do with naming ceremonies and 8 days traditions that would have predated, modern First Temple Judaism, the compilation of the Torah and, things like that. And so it's just really, really fascinating discussion. And one of the reasons why I love having these conversations about it. And then we got into, so His Majesty's wife, Queen Angelique, who is in fact born in the United States, is of mixed African and First Tribes Native American Indian heritage, was talking about, members of these groups. So people who had this mixed heritage, which included slaves would have been transported to the United States, who would have married with people that existed before the arrival of Europeans on the continent, looking to making pilgrimage to engage in cacao ceremonies in Nigeria. And this is not my story to tell. I don't, I'm middle-aged white male. I have, part of my family is from the UK, part of my family is from Russia. This is beyond my understanding. So can have an intellectual understanding, but not an emotional connection to any of these things. But is this an incredibly powerful way for people to connect, different aspects of their heritage? How do I connect, my, First Tribes native connection, that part of my background with my African heritage? And I'm going, well, how does that work? And I can understand it again. Intellectually, I can understand it. And again, for people who find it a real way to connect with an identity, to connect with their heritage, completely, for this whole idea. But then I'm going, we have archaeological evidence of cacao reaching northern New Mexico, the Chaco Canyon area in northern New Mexico. It's a couple of hours drive from where I am right now, and I need to go there at some point. But we know that cacao is traded all the way as far north as that, and we don't have any archaeological evidence that we found so far of any spread beyond this region. But is it hard to imagine that someone perhaps from a Shinnecock or Algonquin or some other tribe, which is more heavily located on the East Coast, might have made a spiritual pilgrimage that took them as far west as Navajo, Hopi, those tribes, and would have encountered cacao and would have taken it back with them. It's not a hard. It made it all the way from Ecuador to Chaco Canyon. I mean, it took several thousand years perhaps for that to happen, but it did make it that far. So is it impossible to imagine? It's certainly plausible to suggest that the tribes who were living along the eastern seaboard with the arrival of Europeans had at least some awareness of cacao. I mean, that kind of research, I would just love to know if there's anything like that. That was part of a discussion yesterday. I thought I was going to have an hour phone call and it ended up being 2.5 hours because we're having this conversation exploring all these kinds of things. So we're at the end of the hour. I want to get through things. Natalia is saying you couldn't sell a normal cacao liquor as ceremonial cacao. I agreed. Not everybody has your sense of ethics, right? If I can have a 100% pure cocoa, it has a particular flavor profile, and I present it in a certain context, or people consume it in a certain context, there's going to be a placebo effect. There's going to be some sort of confirmation bias, and it will have an effect. And maybe they understand that some brands have more affect than others, more effect than others. And so they might choose one over another. But I agree with you. If you're going to be selling a ceremonial cacao, documenting its provenance is a real important part of what you're doing. So Jacqueline Minsen, who's connecting from the Netherlands, greetings from Amsterdam. Great topic. Jacqueline, thank you very much. And I do need to get back to you. You have this interesting project that's going on near the border of Colombia and Venezuela, I understand, in terms of helping indigenous communities or communities of women. I don't entirely remember, but I do want to get back to you about having a conversation about that project on the Chocolate Life in the future. So you heard me say it out loud. We'll do it. Again, Natalia, our people have given name to the trees and even talked to them. This is, I think, a place where Brigitte is going to, if you don't know her book, and unfortunately, Brigitte, I'm blanking on the topic, but I will put a link to it on the page, that this is not surprising to me at all, right? According to their beliefs, plants have the power to complement healing, and you have to ask them to act in the body and mind and spirit. And I would say with that, when I look at a lot of indigenous cultures, and I would say also pre-Enlightenment cultures. So the moment we started thinking methodologically, naturally, right, the general assumption was that these kinds of intercessions were not particularly effective. Yet there is an enormous mental and spiritual and emotional value that people take in them, irrespective of what science tells us. Might or may not be the actual case. And again, please make part two then. Oh, you want me to just focus on the other part of it? I may do that, but I'm going to let this sit for a while. I'm going to see if I can get some comments. I'm looking to get, so here's I think, if Natalia comes back to me with additional research and notes, what I will do is I will take a look at that research and notes. I'll continue to explore as people get to me. And I think if there's something really, really interesting, I will get back to that as well. And Natalia, sorry, there's no reason to apologize. You have nothing to apologize for getting excited about everything related to cacao and chocolate. In case you hadn't noticed, I do too, right? And that's why I'm here every week. So doing the Chocolate Life Live provides me with an opportunity to go and research a topic that I'm interested in and to share my thoughts and to hear from other people about what they think about what I'm talking about. So really great. Want to go do that. Jacqueline says you've never met Keith. This is Mr. Wilson. But at heart, he is more a ceremonial guru, I'm guessing. I would say I would not be so gracious with him. I think this is an example. Number one is he's making a lot of money. He's making a lot of money in Guatemala compared with the average Guatemalan. And I don't know to what extent he's sharing the benefits. You know, if he's buying cocoa at farm gate prices, which are consistent with farm gate prices, and he's selling it for the equivalent of 50 euros a kilo, he's not sharing with local farmers. And, you know, again, go and read this. There's some really interesting descriptions of what he talks about when he does his cacao ceremonies in Guatemala, right? So go take a look. So I would not be as gracious to call him a guru. Anyway, Brigitte chimes in to apologize. Natalia, never apologize. Absolutely. To which Natalia hearts back. Thank you very much. I'm loving the cross conversation in the comments. So Martin van Amsik from Dubai says, fascinating. Thank you very much. Absolutely. It's, again, I often pick topics for which I have sort of a surface level understanding, surface level awareness, and getting ready to talk about these topics. So doing the research is what's of interest to me, and I can integrate this into my much larger understanding of the universe of cocoa and chocolate. And so, hopefully I'm sharing my excitement, my understanding with all of you. And then absolutely, Jacqueline, other people call him a guru, not you. I don't even call him a guru. I'm not going to go so far as to call him a charlatan. But somewhere between those two extremes is where I would put him. I also want to point out that if you go to the Chocolate Life Live, when you get below a certain point, all of these resources are video resources. So there's a challenge sharing audio on StreamYard. I need to go through a process. But one of the things that's really, really eye-opening is going down here and watching this last one, right, which is David Wolf's Cacao Ceremony, invoking the cacao god. And this is a festival that took place in Amsterdam, I want to say in 2015, although it could be later than 2015. And listening to David talk about this when we talk about it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm no longer sharing. Let me go do this. So this one here, David Wolf, it's this one. These are all links to YouTube. You're not going to hear the audio, but listen to go hear David talk about what it is that he's talking about. It's really, really quite fascinating. And then go do a search on Keith Wilson, and there are videos of him talking about his cacao ceremonies. There are videos of cacao ceremonies that other people have taken that Keith has given. Just really eye-opening in terms of what it is that they're saying. I would also say that there are, so for example, we have this there is a New Yorker, and I want to say the woman's last name is Friedman. Listening to her talk about I believe one of the videos for this is in here, but she talks about how they're doing ceremony and they're adding blue lotus and they're adding rose flavoring into cacao. Again, these are things which have nothing to do with traditional cacao ceremonies. They're very, very much about taking elements of New Age spiritualism and incorporating them in a spiritual ceremony. But what we've done is we've taken it out of the milieu, the cultural environment, which caused it to be created in the first place, and turned it into something else. And in doing so, what we're doing is we're confusing people. something to be aware of. Again, I don't want to go on forever, on this. It's real fascinating. What I will do is, again, Jacqueline, you made a great suggestion. If Natalia can provide me with some of these resources, I will come back and do a part 2 on this, and we'll discuss that research. If I can find some additional research, talking with other people, I will also. Oh, I believe Brigitte's book is The Jaguar and the Cacao Tree. That may be it. Again, I'll put a link to it in today's live stream. And with that, listen, I want to say, thank you very much to everyone who has participated in today's session, who've been here from the beginning. We're now at 1 hour and 10 minutes, all the way through to the end. Thank you very much. I want to remind everybody who is still watching and if they're watching from YouTube, go and subscribe to the Chocolate Wire channel. Click the like this video or heart this video or both, and to share this, if you found the topic interesting, with friends and colleagues and family, so that we can spread the word about what we're doing here. Also, if you are not yet a member of the Chocolate Life, you can go to the homepage. This is the homepage right now. I'm logged in, so it says account here. But if you're not a member, it'll say join, or I have my little avatar down here. And so if you're not a member, it'll say join, right? So join. There's a free membership level. There's also premium membership levels where you get access to special content. And I also want to point out that we're doing the 2023 Craft Chocolate Challenge in mid-November, and you can go purchase tasting kits now. There's a special member price. Free member, premium member, doesn't matter, but there's a special membership price that you can go and do that. And with that, thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of today's live stream. And I look forward to seeing many of you or most of you back here in the future. I got some interesting topics that we'll be talking about going forward. They're in the works. And I want to close, as I always close, with a reminder. If you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you are doing it wrong. And today's episode for me has just been a lot of fun. So thank you, everyone,